Sports Professor Rick Horrow, inside the $1.3 trillion business of sports. Your special Super Bowl on the record. You know where we are. It's the Ernest Morial Convention Center, morphed into Radio Row. 6,000 of your closest media friends here, as opposed to 5,200 credentials. Last year, 800 more people decided they knew the difference between whether a football was stuffed or blown up and applied for a credential, and everybody said, all right, here we go, why not? Over 300 countries and 30 languages, and it fits the television dollars. We're going to go through some of the highlights at the beginning of this because obviously the opening bell has to be the biggest event in the world. I am going to New Zealand. We'll do some special reporting from there in a couple of weeks. And I was looking at the programming schedule over the next couple of weeks. The All Blacks, obviously, the Tall Blacks, the New Zealand basketball team. February's littered, and I'm going to do some stuff from Auckland. But the biggest show on the calendar, Super Bowl watching parties, all Monday. They're, our Sunday. And on. It is not just America's game, it's the world's game. Interview today, special interview. Frank Supovitz, the former head of special events for the NFL. There are only 4 of them in the world that have ever done this job. And he is probably one of the more senior guys. He runs a company now called Fast Traffic, which does consulting just like he did with the NFL, but on an international scale to boot. We are going to talk to him about everything you want to know Super Bowl. Backdrop, New Orleans Convention Visitors, Bureau Sports Foundation right back there. All of the gaggle of media right over there. So let's get to it. So our on-the-record opening drive, number 1. Super Bowl viewership, 7% increase from the previous year's 115 million per Nielsen. The out-of-home viewers for the Chiefs 49ers 2 years ago, significantly up, then down, then up. 2.3 million from Univision's Spanish coverage and 1.2 million from Nickelodeon's SpongeBob simulcast, all the streaming service. For the first time, obviously, you have a true count. Eyeballs in churches, eyeballs in bars, eyeballs watching one TV. Used to be Nielsen calls you, you answer, you have a family of 30 over, and you get 1 tick. Not enough. The numbers are big, they're getting bigger. That's number 1. Number 2, tickets. The average so far is about $1,800 less than it has been, but as we tape this midweek, it's going to go up. People from Philly are notoriously last-minute buyers, everybody looking for a good deal. The problem is there probably aren't that many good deals to be had. Superdome's capacity pretty significant, but the face value of tickets, NFL-related, goes up to $12,500. Scalpers, ticket buyers, secondary market people, beware. There is a very intricate tag system on the tickets where if you deliver them to somebody else at a markup, you're going to be busted. Whether it's okay for the person who gave them to you originally or not, that's between you and your maker. It's number 2. Number 3, local events such as some of the other issues. Obviously, it's a big deal. The Vegas room nights, $747. Here, averaging $650 per night. But yet, after the incredibly horrific terrorist attack, the numbers aren't as high in the center city for obvious reasons. Proximity to the stadium slightly impacts pricing. By the way, Airbnb, the private market, up to $10.5 million so far for New Orleans residents. Let's see how much of that is reported, by the way. That's number 3. Number 4, advertising revenue. Fox initially priced the 30-second ad slots, $7 million. Now, some of them are going for over $8.5 million. And the Super Bowl 1 ad, by the way, $37,500, about $375,000 when adjusted for inflation. Now we're talking $8 million. Fun thing to watch, ladies and gentlemen, are the outlier ads, companies that you may not have heard of, because on Monday, those marketing directors become heroes and gobbled up by the big boys, or they are way, way, way out on the street. That's number 4. Number 5, Supreme Court's decision as far as gaming, $23.1 billion in legal sports betting handle last year. a five-fold increase from the 4.2 billion that was attracted 3 years earlier. And obviously, the betting lines change. People complain. All of the FanDuels and DraftKings and everybody else around here talking about latency. That's the biggest issue. Actually, there are two. The delivery of the information coincide with the live game. If it's even 3 or 4 seconds off, everybody understands there's time to place a bet in this highly technological mobile betting world. Got to work on that. Second, post-COVID survival of the fittest, the smaller companies want to be gobbled up at a multiple by the big companies. So all of those dynamics are being held right here in New Orleans. And then finally, kind of the bonus, the players, the salaries. Everybody who's anybody is endorsing stuff that in many cases they have never seen the product until, if they're lucky, maybe yesterday. But the real numbers, obviously, are the salaries and the salary caps. Mahomes' 10-year, $450 million contract remains the largest in NFL history. Saquon's $13.25 million AAV reflects the declining market value for running backs, but it doesn't reflect Howie Roseman's genius, where he tacks on a couple of years, gets a guy. New York Giant fans remember this is a Hall of Famer that has turned the franchise in Philadelphia. You don't need to hear this around. So those are the big issues to look forward to for Super Bowl 59 here in New Orleans. Coming up next, Frank Supovitz, the former director of special events, Super Bowl, Pro Bowl, draft, all of the issues you want to hear about from Frank. Oh, by the way, he was also a contributor to my book, The Sport Business Handbook, a really good friend. He's got some incredible perspective on all this. We're going to hear from Frank in just a minute. Sports Professor Rick Horrow, inside the $1.3 trillion business of sports, as we usually do. And this is iconic. We usually do interviews that are behind the scenes. This is very much in front of the scenes as well. As we go through Super Bowl 59, there's only a small handful of folks on this planet who have successfully navigated the helm of the Super Bowl, all aspects, all parts. This is a person as the vice president of special events, senior vice president for the NFL from 2005 through 2014, Commissioner Tagliabue's tenure, singularly responsible with a village of making sure that every aspect of the Super Bowl and ultimately all of the other special events at the NFL ran without a hitch, and now has taken that expertise into being one of the foremost consultants in the world of how to put on, as you might expect, major events pre-COVID and post-COVID. Also a good friend, a contributor to the Sport Business Handbook with a chapter that is appropriately entitled, Be Not Afraid of Greatness, the great Frank Supovitz. How's that for an intro?
That is way more than I deserve, but thank you so much, Doctor.
Not really. Exactly what you deserve. So let's talk about the Super Bowl kind of then and now. The first obvious question, Super Bowl 59 at New Orleans. It's not on automatic pilot, but we've learned a lot from the prior Super Bowls. How have the prior Super Bowls made it a relatively easier experience today than it was maybe years ago when you were doing it?
Oh gosh, I don't think it's easy at all. It's
Good.
not easy to manage. And it's actually a little bit difficult to visit. Security in New Orleans is going to be a prime focus for the National Football League and for law enforcement as well. Clearly the New Year's Eve, New Year's Day tragedy that was accompanying the Sugar Bowl is top of mind for everybody out there. The happy news is, if there is happy news when it comes to that, is that security's always been a focus for the NFL. And so they are only just building on top of the really detailed plans and the really thought out plans that they have had all along to make sure that everybody stays safe. So we'll see some of that when we are in New Orleans. for everybody who's going to be there. It's going to be, a little bit more visible in terms of the safety concerns that our friends in New Orleans have.
Yeah, let's get right to security, then we'll get to some of the other things. I remember we talking before most of the Super Bowls, and you would have the very large ream binder of how to deal with certain circumstances, which no doubt get larger. And the standard question I would always ask you is, are you aware of all possibilities? You can't always be, but how do you deal with every contingency, either anticipated or unanticipated? And it's incredibly difficult. You had an ice storm in Dallas that was unexpected, a generational weather event that year. And this is something that happened on New Year's Sugar Bowl morning that nobody could have anticipated. So, how does the NFL and the host committee and the Superdome and everybody else respond to something like that beyond what they're already doing?
Well, they're already a level one national security event, which means that the federal government applies assets to the protection of people and property in and around Super Bowl. So that's already there. Um, Now they're going to be layering on top of that. I would imagine additional street closures and things of that nature to make sure that pedestrians are safe, fans are safe, and to whatever degree they can, the vehicles are safe as well. But the nexus of all of that is at the Superdome, and because it's a level one national security event, there are security protocols and which would include a secured perimeter, a minimum of 300 feet around the building, that are a combination of Jersey barricades and fencing, two lines of fencing. I think we once calculated that it was somewhere around 2.5 miles of fence around the stadium. Then everything that's inside on game day has to be inspected and cleared with bomb sniffing dogs, and there's a ton of other things that even when I was there, I wasn't aware of in terms of the federal assets that were applied to it. Everything from flight restrictions over the building to what else is up there and on top of some buildings that we as civilians didn't even know about.
Super Bowl in New Orleans, first of all, you've had so many before versus Super Bowls in regional centers, let's say Miami Gardens versus Miami and Lauderdale, Dallas, Fort Worth, SoFi, the regional area. There are certain advantages of everything being close together, aren't there?
Oh, there are. That's because there's probably around 30,000 hotel rooms that are being used by fans and by contractors, players, staff of the NFL. About 30,000 hotel rooms that are required, and the ability to be able to literally walk from all of those hotel rooms, or the majority of those hotel rooms, straight down Poydras Street into the Superdome, makes for a much smoother transition. Certainly a whole lot less traffic involved. Um, so that is indeed a great advantage. I think, Indianapolis was like that too, where you had this very
Yeah.
compact downtown area, which is really where Super Bowl lived. And what's wonderful is, New Orleans is a party town every night of the week, 52
Yeah.
weeks a year. So, managing or in managing a Super Bowl and trying to add additional excitement, the excitement of Super Bowl on top of what happens there every night, that makes that makes for a much more seamless experience, right? Everywhere you look is a party and fun and celebration, and this time it's Super Bowl themed, it's football themed. So, the fans are going to have a blast, and I know that when it comes to business partners, it's one of the, most highly regarded, most highly anticipated sites that can host a Super Bowl.
You're on the shoulders of Jim Steig. Peter O'Reilly is on your shoulders. There are, as I said, only a few people in the world that have the experience to be able to do this. How has the planning changed, let's say, from the up with people Super Bowls early to today.
Yeah, it's funny. Our friends at the Greater New Orleans Sports
Yeah.
Foundation brought Jim and myself and Peter all together. We're the three people who are still breathing that have managed Super Bowls, and we were all there to compare notes. Um, I think that just the huge amount of exposure, the numbers of people who watch the Super Bowl, both in the stadium, of course, it's going to be sold out, but we're talking about over 100 million people watching on television. That has always been topmost in our minds to make sure that we have a seamless experience, one that everybody can enjoy. Um, Jim, in his day, had a lot of the up with people types of halftimes because that's what its purpose was back then. Those
Right.
halftimes were about filling the time and filling the field, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I actually worked for Jim. When I was at Radio City Music Hall, I was the associate producer of the halftime for Super Bowl 22. We had 88 grand pianos because it was 1988. We had 88 legs of the Rockettes. Do the math for you, 44 Rockettes. So and that was in 1988. And it was about filling the time with spectacle and filling the field. Um, then it became, still under Jim, it became more of a star-driven type of a halftime show because, well, frankly, that's what audiences wanted.
Yeah.
And Jim was able to deliver that. He did a tremendous job with it. And by the time Super Bowls came under my supervision, Super Bowl 40 uh, in Detroit, those halftime shows were not even managed by me. There was a whole new group of people that were doing it out of NFL Network, very talented folks. My job was to make sure that they had everything that they logistically needed to be able to get, the biggest rock and roll show of the year put together in 10 minutes and then take it apart in 7 or 8, and then be able to entertain the world for 12 minutes with, incredible spectacle. And I think they did a tremendous job with that. Um, Whoever's managing it now, and I can't tell you whether it's Peter or the network, but I think it's Jay-Z, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
They're again continuing with the great tradition of bringing the top stars and being a much more contemporary, in terms of the music that they are performing nowadays and the artists.
You So obviously diversity. We'll talk about what Fast Track has done with your post NFL career, but the NHL from '92 to 2005, you've got your special events there, and you did a great job with that. And then obviously the Super Bowl, and now uh, are the are the logistics of event planning broadly defined more similar or more different than they were, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago? And what's the root cause of the change, if there is one? Is it COVID or is it just something else?
I there's a real focus on the experience from every touch point. So once upon a time, it was about the passive entertainment. Everything that we did was outside the lines. And it was about the videos that you played and the music that you played and the ceremonies that you had before and after the trophy ceremonies and the half times or between periods entertainment and that sort of thing. And that's still really, really important. But there's a real recognition, and there was even when I was at the NFL, that there are touch points that are much more service oriented. The stuff that it's all fine unless something goes wrong. And then when that something goes wrong, that's when everybody notices that we didn't do our jobs very well, whether it's a transportation related issue or a stadium related issue, or even you mentioned COVID. Now there's less of a tolerance for stadiums that aren't clean,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
kept clean and kept well. The money that's being spent now to retrofit stadiums like the Superdome, where they've gotten rid of those long ramps that used to bring you up and
Yeah.
down. They've now replaced them with escalators, which are faster, higher capacity, take up less room. There's more space in the concourses. So it's about, the entire experience, and there's even more of a focus on the delivery of good food. It's not just about hot dogs anymore. Not that there's anything particularly wrong with hot dogs, but it's about, the full experience from, every sense and every touch point from driveway to driveway. So there's a lot more emphasis on the delivery of a good service environment.
Tell me about the global streaming, social media, broadly defined aspect of the world. In the late 60s, I remember the number where the first Super Bowl was telecast on two networks competing with each other, and it
Mhm.
was run as maybe a special event, and the commercials. I don't remember what the number was. I think it was like 30,000, but it wasn't $7 million, 30-second spot. And so today, it's not just the traditional network, but it's also the social media where everybody is a photographer and a television producer. How does that augur? What's that do to the experience?
Yeah, and it's managing multiple screens,
Yeah,
at once. I mean, people aren't just watching television anymore. They're watching television and watching X or TikTok or Instagram to see what people are saying. And I'm just as guilty, and I'm not even in the target market anymore.
no,
You
you and I
know,
are way, way, way
yeah,
beyond the target
way
market, by the
beyond
way,
the
just so you
target
know.
market. But there, even with, the recent conference championship games, when there was a particular play, I didn't really understand why it was called. I would check my socials and see what other people thought, and then I would like what people were saying that thought just like I did. So there's this greater community of fans that are communicating, both formally with people they know and informally with people that they don't really know, just to continue that tribal experience in the digital space. So that's definitely happening. I will tell you as well that when people have a complaint at an event, when something didn't land the way we want to from an entertainment perspective, or it didn't land the way we want to from a service perspective, we see that on social media right away.
Yeah,
Even stuff we never saw before, never knew was happening before. Um, it's smart to have an eye on the social media or somebody watching it to be able to say, hey, there's a problem here. I'll give you a quick example. In 2014 at the Super Bowl in MetLife Stadium, we had planned for a deep, deep cold event, right? Because it was
yeah,
February, it was in the New York metropolitan area. It had been 16 degrees on Wednesday. At kickoff, it was 49 degrees. We never
yeah,
expected it to be that warm. In fact, New Orleans still holds the record for the coldest Super Bowl field conditions,
yeah,
ever. Um, and we were watching social media. We had somebody watching it for us. The media were complaining that they were too warm because we had put them in a spot underneath the overhang of a balcony and had mounted infrared lights, sort of like French fries
yeah.
in a
Right.
bin, so that they would be warm throughout the game. But because it was 49 degrees, they felt like French fries, and they were
Yeah.
complaining. So we saw that on social media, and then we're able to shut off the heaters for them so that they could be more comfortable. That can work to your advantage.
Or turn them up, make it hotter. Fried media. I love it. That's something you wouldn't have heard any day with Frank Supovitz. So talk to me about, and we'll talk about fast traffic. Talk to me about those who say that because television is moving in X direction, that these facilities are going to be glorified TV studios in the future and that the fans don't matter anymore. I know you have an opinion about that, so do I, but respond to that.
Well, there's no question that just in general, stadium design has changed. And the emphasis now is on yield per seat. if you will. So how much money a particular individual sitting in one particular space is going to generate. So back in the days of watching a Jets game at Shea Stadium and being in the last row of the upper deck, or let's call it baseball. I remember going to Mets games and spending $1.35 for a seat upstairs just to fill the seats, in general admission up way up top. That's just not happening anymore, right? We are losing the entry level sport fan, and I think that's a shame. The people who are coming to the stadium for the first time because there's a low price point for them to be able to do that. That's just not generally happening in the major leagues, in sports major leagues. Minor league, yeah, you can find that,
Yeah.
and secondary, for the lack of a better term, leagues that are not mainstream, not in the top five or top six or whatever. It's becoming harder for them to find the point of entry, and we're depending upon television to do that work for us. And I think that's ultimately it's going to be something that's got to be watched.
Yep, I think you're probably right at all that. And let's talk kind of finally at the end of substance, the nature of the experience cross culturally. Let us know fast traffics, qualifications, what you're doing internationally. Obviously, you've been Australia and almost every major country with major events. So your experience in all of those countries, and what are the major differences and similarities between putting on events in America and putting on events in the rest of the world?
Well, it really depends on which country you're going to, right? I mean, and I think it's as much a function of the sport culture than it is the social culture. So in Australia, I was really honored to be working with the National Rugby League for a little while, consulting on their events. They wanted to make their grand final a little bit more like the Super Bowl in terms of being a nationally significant event from a cultural perspective. Um, they were very concentrated on the game and the game alone. When I first went to Australia for them, they they gave me the list of events that they wanted me to look at, and they said, "Oh, make sure you bring a tuxedo with a couple of tuxedo shirts, and then tell us what you think is wrong." And I
Yeah,
said, well, I can think of one,
yeah,
maybe
right now,
two right
right?
now.
Yeah, yeah,
Is that, there were black tie events around it. But there wasn't a whole lot for the fans to do. And it was all about the two teams that were playing in the final. It wasn't about it wasn't a celebration of the sport. And Super Bowl is not about the two teams until the last 2 weeks.
yeah,
Until that time, it's really a celebration of American football. And you go to the Super Bowl experience or you go to the parties, and sure, there is branding that relates to, and there will be branding that relates to the Chiefs and the Eagles this year. But it's really about football, and everybody's there. And one of the things that I helped to craft for them was the ability to take it and make it a little bit broader, so that regardless of what team you followed, there was a reason to come to Sydney and watch the grand final or be part of that bigger celebration of rugby league. So that is one example. The other is just the way that stadiums are managed. In some countries,
yeah,
and again, it's a function of the sport. You don't want to mix fans together, right?
yeah.
There can be security and safety issues related to that, which when we went to London the first time, for the first regular season game in 2007 with the NFL, they said, well, you can't sell tickets on game day because then we can't tell what fan they are, whether they are Giants fans or they're Miami fans. And it was like, why does that matter? And, if you watched the conference championships this year, you saw Buffalo fans sitting with Chiefs fans, and it's just a whole different whole different sensibility, whole different experience there. So when you go internationally, it's as much a function of the sport culture differences than it is necessarily the individual national cultures.
So, final question. So it's February 10, and you're waking up, and it's Super Bowl after Monday, and just like Jim Steig did before you, and just like Peter O'Reilly does after you, you wake up and you say, "Man, this is a great day, and we succeeded because."
We succeeded because the stadium was full, people were having a blast, everything went off safely. And I should have even said that first because safety is primary. Nothing else matters if there isn't safety.
Yeah.
Um, and then and then you spend the next several months hearing about all the things you did wrong.
Yeah.
Um, and you have to be ready for that because look, Super Bowl's gargantuan. These are big events. Something's going wrong all the time somewhere. And it's just, a question of how noticeable it was or how it impacted the overall experience. And hopefully it didn't impact the overall experience. It's still just a minor issue that has to be fixed for next time.
Well, I will say this after being involved in this industry for 50, 60 years, whatever it is, excited to be part of the Super Bowl experience, largely because Frank Supovitz, with help, has made it what it is today. Frank, I consider you a really good friend. Really appreciate it. Thanks again for being part of this.
Thank you, Rick. Good to be with you.
Sports Professor Rick Horrow, speak with you soon. 1.6, $1.3 trillion business of sports. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We talked to Frank Supovitz, incredible perspective. We talked about the top issues here in New Orleans. But how about this? Let's focus a little bit for our issues to watch. Not five, but first of all, the game itself, and then I kind of want to talk about what this all means to New Orleans and, frankly, the NFL. So, as far as the game itself, Sony providing record deployment of cameras for Super Bowl 59, 140 cameras for AP sideline photography, halftime show, pregame content outside the dome, a record deployment Sony has had for any Super Bowl, supplying its tech for Super Bowl for years, but the first ever official Sony technology partnership with the NFL. And what that means is that they have the ability to go out hard to make sure that the technical aspects slowly catch up with the television aspects. Remember, there is always a battle of, do you want to be here for a unique experience? Do you want to feel like you're here? More than that, there is a feeling here that this is a huge, huge issue, not just for the 11th Super Bowl here in New Orleans, but also television and split screens and other media is getting bigger than ever. Let me then finalize this all with some perspective. This is number 33 Super Bowl for me. I'm really old. And the bottom line is, Super Bowls come, Super Bowls go. I remember the first Super Bowl out on the West Coast, the second Super Bowl in my hometown of South Florida, Miami, third Super Bowl. I was there when Joe Namath did his guarantee, and they beat the Colts, the Jets, 16-7, propelling Joe Namath to the Hall of Fame. We all understand that. But 59, it goes by. You can mark kind of the Sparrows returning to Capistrano, seeing some of these nuts in the media center 3 or 4 days before the game starts, returning every single year for their shot at fame. More important than that, I think, is a serious perspective here. The sports business has an ability to rally folks like none other. And when you want to think about it, what about the Sugar Bowl terrorist attack, which was unprecedented? Who's to blame? Terrorist inspired, et cetera, et cetera. It's all kind of secondary. First is paying homage to the families of the deceased and the families that are injured and the families that are traumatized. But maybe even as important for society to have a game that had a slot, that had the ability in a community that understands how important it is socially for a game to happen, to move the game, not a week, not 2 weeks, would have screwed up the playoffs, but for a day. And at the end of that day, everybody put their collective consciousnesses into making this the best game ever as far as the ability to pull something like this off without a hitch. And then Jay Cicero, the head of the Sports Foundation, along with federal and state help, got the significant task of making sure Super Bowl 59 gets pulled off without a hitch and crossing every finger and toe. So far, so good. Point is, New Orleans has done it before. You remember the Katrina story. We've chronicled that before. Doug Thornton, the guy that runs the Dome, in my book, Sport Business Handbook, talks about how close this team actually was to becoming the San Antonio Saints. And then Paul Tagliabue and others basically said, we're not going to give this up. This is a city that transcends, and that's exactly what happened. So the bottom line is this city has the ability to help the industry get past some of the more horrific national and international events, man-made and otherwise. And I think we're all kind of lucky that New Orleans was chosen by fate or otherwise as the region to help the entire country respond, thanks to the Sugar Bowl and now thanks to Super Bowl 59. And moving on, this is the 11th Super Bowl here. Miami has 11. We now have a two-way tie. Next up are most of the new venues that will be part of rotations. Vegas, obviously important. Phoenix, SoFi, San Francisco on the East Coast. Hey, what about Atlanta? Hey, what about Tampa? Miami's got to get it. There are issues for dome facilities. Indy wants another one. Cleveland getting a new stadium again. Even the cold weather cities want a shot. You know, New England, what about them? New York pulled off a 50-degree Super Bowl years ago. What about going back there? If Chicago gets a dome, that's going to be part of a regular rotation. Minnesota, again, Super Bowls finally understood that sports is not sports. This is big business. So as we say goodbye, Super Bowl 59, think of how lucky we are to have an event that brings us together as families and as a country. Enjoy the game, everybody. I'd like to thank Callie Kazar for helping us put this together, Frank Supovitz for giving us some perspective, and you for listening and watching. Join us next week. Another segment, another show, post-Super Bowl recap. Sports Professor Rick Horrow. Speak with you soon.